One of the experiences I trust every homebrewer shares is the feeling of awe that comes from witnessing the conversion of wort into beer through the fermentation process. Even after 15 years, I still get giddy when I see the first signs of airlock activity, a nice fluffy kreuzen developing on top of my beer. The worst is when this takes too long. You all know the anxiety that comes from checking on a batch a day after pitching and seeing no action. This is why we love Imperial Yeast, who pack 200 billion cells of the purest yeast into each pitch-right pouch, which assures quick starts, healthy fermentation, and predictably great results. I strongly urge all of our listeners to check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and let them know that you appreciate their support of the Brülosophy podcast while you're at it. All right, on to the show. Hey everybody, you're listening to the 330th episode of the Brülosophy podcast, which means it is time for another Brü A. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and today I'm joined by contributor Jordan Folks to answer a bunch of questions submitted by listeners of the show, something we do every 10th episode.
Can you believe this is my first time doing this? I'm super excited to jump in.
Oh, I know. And we've been looking forward to having you on one of these Brü A episodes for a while, but it's been kind of difficult given we only do them every 10th episode. It kind of limits our options there. I'm really stoked to have you on this one, especially considering some of the questions, which I feel are almost more like tailored to somebody with your interests. So I'm looking forward to getting into those with you. If you enjoy this show, we'd love for you to consider becoming a patron of Brülosophy, which you can do over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. By making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. Coming up in May of 2024, Brülosophy's own Alex Shanks Abel will be taking the pulpit, as it were. While one of the newest contributors to the crew, Alex has actually been involved with Brülosophy for a few years, as they are the one of the folks who's responsible for helping to build the Brew Club into what it is today. If you happen to be a fan of the Brülosophy Show, our YouTube channel, then you likely caught Alex sharing their tips on brewing like a cheapskate. And if you're anything like me, you loved what they had to say. It was an absolutely hilarious, in my opinion, kind of a foray into the way Alex saves a bit of money with his brewing. Alex is going to be hanging out with patrons on Saturday, May 18th, 2024. So make sure to make your pledge of just $3 or more by Friday the 17th. All past sessions are stored on our private Patreon and Facebook pages, so patrons can go back and watch them whenever they like. Learn more about all of the rewards we offer for your support and become a patron today over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at Brülosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. Your experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little kickback for the referral. And just a little tip, I got an email about this earlier in the week. Yes, you don't have to just buy brewing stuff when you're using certain links that are named after a river. You can use those all the time, and we get a little commission for that. Very, very small commission for that. Finally, if you wouldn't mind, please take a few seconds to leave a rating and review of this show in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts. We always appreciate hearing what you think about how we're doing. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who are known for their incredible all-in-one electric brewing systems. I've brewed on both their 120 and 240 volt systems. These things are absolutely legit, efficient, easy to use with a relatively small footprint. You're not going to be disappointed with one of these units. Plus, the guys behind the company run an incredible YouTube channel, which you can find by searching YouTube for Clawhammer Supply. If you're in the market for electric brewing gear or even just reasonably priced kettles and such, make sure to check out what Clawhammer Supply has to offer at clawhammersupply.com, and don't forget to let them know Brülosophy sent you when you're checking out. That is clawhammersupply.com. Listener Jeff Klaus wrote in after listening to the episodes where we focused on recent changes and such to the AHA. Now, just a heads up that we got a lot of feedback on this still coming in, so you're going to hear a bit more about it. Jeff said, having heard the requests for BrewCon, now he spelled this BR_UCon, I wanted to echo those requests. I know that planning this event would take a lot of work and money, but I think your listeners and patrons would be glad to pitch in to make this event happen, whether that's with fundraising or even helping to plan logistics. Also, in the interest of trying to get more people into brewing, we could encourage attendees to bring a friend who doesn't yet homebrew. Demos to show how simple homebrewing can be, combined with good homebrew, may just get people into this hobby. What do you think, Jordan?
I mean, if you want to throw together an entire festival, I'll go. It sounds like a lot of fun, but man, I do a lot of events on the side here as well. And it's a lot of work, but man, it's so fun and it's so rewarding to throw a big party like that. So if we can ever pull it together, man, I'm there.
I'll tell you, the number of emails and comments that we've received about hosting some sort of a Brulosophy-centric event has been quite surprising. I mean, this isn't a new idea. We've actually had patrons suggest we do something like this for years. But after those AHA episodes, and likely because of the fact that HomebrewCon isn't going to be happening this year, the support for such an event really does seem to be like ramping up. You're right, Jordan. Anybody who has organized something particularly involving alcohol, which you have to get licenses or you have to rent out places that already have the ability to serve booze, it is not that easy. I've organized, I believe it's 2 pre-HomebrewCon events now, and just the time it took to get everything in place, that's not talking about money or anything, just to know what we were doing on a single night, took 6 months. And that was with a whole group of people participating. So yeah, if we want to do something, which I'm open to, I guess, we'd have to have the help of people outside of Brulosophy who are really motivated to invest their time and energy. And it's going to cost a little bit as well into planning something like this. Now, unfortunately, it's far too late to get something going for 2024. Not only does that planning take a lot of time, as Jeff mentioned, it also takes a lot of money, but my calendar's booked at this point. I don't have any open weekends at this point. Like I said, I'm open to putting something together for the future or working with people to put something together, but it would absolutely have to be with the assistance of outside folks. And Jeff, I'm with you. Live brewing demos would be badass, as would offering attendees the opportunity to engage in like mock hop selection, participate in Brulosophy triangle tests, among other interactive things. That really is the way that we would want to approach such an event. In fact, in talking with the guys from Yakima Valley Hops prior to the whole COVID debacle, that was exactly what our plan was, is to have people show up there. It'd be a smaller group, so it'd be limited number of tickets, but have them engage in hop selection and just kind of get a feel for what that's like, as opposed to just sitting in a lecture and listening to somebody that from the internet talk for an hour and a half or whatever it is. So will this ever get off the ground? I really don't know. But I suppose time will tell. But if you are interested, don't be afraid to let us know. That's going to serve as motivation. So thank you for the email, Jeff. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. Alrighty, when we return from this break, answers to your questions. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brulosophy sent you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer, and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts.
Worried about letting someone else pick out the perfect avocado for your perfect impress them on the third date guacamole? Well, good thing Instacart shoppers are as picky as you are. They find ripe avocados like it's their guac on the line. They are milk expiration date detectives. They bag eggs like the 12 precious pieces of cargo they are. So let Instacart shoppers overthink your groceries so that you can overthink what you'll wear on that third date. Download the Instacart app to get free delivery on your first 3 orders while supplies last. Minimum $10 per order. Additional terms apply.
Say goodbye to your credit card rewards. Greedy corporate mega stores, led by Walmart and Target, are pushing for a law in Congress to take away your hard-earned cash back and travel points to line their pockets. The Durbin-Marshall credit card bill would enact harmful credit card routing mandates that would end credit card rewards as we know it. If you love your credit card rewards, tell your lawmakers, hands off my rewards. Tell them to oppose the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill.
Huge thanks to all of you who sent in questions for this episode. We've got a pretty good stockpile at this point, far too many to get through in a single episode. So if you happen to have sent a question in and we don't get to it today, chances are it will be addressed in a future Brü A. All right, first question comes from Ryan Ellum, who says, can you please give a quick overview of how you're currently doing your dry hopping? It seems like there's a ton of different opinions, so I'm not looking for the definitive answer unless you have it. My current method involves adding dry hops directly to the keg after kegging with a hop sock and then just purging the small amount of headspace, which I think gives good bang for the buck, but I only make simple beers with 40 to 60 grams of dry hops. So Jordan, it sounds like Ryan is not really dry hopping in the fermenter, which I think most people are probably doing, but once the beer is fully fermented, puts it in his keg with a, socked up dose of dry hops. What are your thoughts?
So this is definitely something I've played around with a lot, and I've arrived at a method that I've been using solidly for the last few years, and I think I'm making really potent IPAs. The amount of hop flavor and aroma that I'm getting from dry hopping is extremely strong in a good way, more so than I often get in cans and stuff. So I think that I might be onto something here. And so my method is, after fermentation is complete, I'm racking the beer into a dry hopping keg. And so what that involves is I take a standard 5-gallon corny keg. It's been retrofitted with the floating dip tube with filter from morebeer.com. And I fill that with SaniClean, a non-foaming sanitizer. And I use CO2 to push that out into the next keg in the daisy chain. I then open the keg, quickly add the dry hops, and I'm dry hopping pretty heavily, about 2 ounces per gallon, then quickly seal it, and then I purge that like 5 times or so. Then I do a closed transfer into that from my fermentation keg. But if you have a stainless conical or whatever, you could do the same thing with the pressure transfer system that people are probably using.
Yeah.
Key to that is, one, I'm dry hopping warm. 65 degrees or so, wherever the fermentation may land. And also, I'm not using any hop socks. And I know that Brülosophy has probably done experiments on that, but I've found anecdotally that loose dry hops just add a lot more flavor and aroma. When you pull those hop socks or hop tubes out, they're just totally packed solid from expansion.
Yeah.
And so at the dry hop levels I'm doing, that seems to be necessary. But I will say, I just recently violated that rule, and I just dry hop straight into the fermentation keg. It does ruin the yeast pitch, which I like to save, and it's tasting pretty good. So I might start to play around with skipping this extra step, because after my dry hop phase, I go a day at room temp, then I throw it in the fridge under pressure, and then crash cool it, and then I'm able to pressure transfer out into a serving keg, and I'm not getting any clogging. But if in a world where I don't want to keep the yeast pitch, I'm starting to think that maybe I can just skip that extra keg and just go straight into primary after fermentation is done.
Yeah. So your approach is like a more convoluted version of things that I've tried in the past. One, just as an aside, your comment about the yeast pitch, if you go back and look at some of our original experiments from 2015, 2016, I was on this whole tear for a while of testing out what we called sloppy slurry. It's like just unrinsed, unwashed yeast that was used to ferment, different batches being pitched directly into another batch. And surprisingly, hoppy yeast slurry, so, yeast slurry that was fermented a beer that got dry hopped on the yeast cake, doesn't seem to impart much character at all. Now, I'm with you, just kind of anal about it. I wouldn't do that, as a matter of course, but kind of an interesting finding, anecdotally and through the experiments. But I have a little bit different of an approach. What I started doing, I think I've told the story before. I was brewing outside with my friend one time. This is 10 years ago or so. And he helped me design this recipe called Smiling Sky. It's actually on the website. You can go find it. It's a real basic pale ale, kind of Simcoe heavy pale ale. And I went inside at the end of the brew day, and he's looking at our brewing notes, the recipe, and he sees, dry hop with this much in the fermenter. So while I'm inside, he weighs out those hops and he throws it in. We haven't even pitched the yeast yet. We had just chilled the wort. He throws those dry hops in, and I come out and I'm like, where are the hops at that we got out? We got to put, did you put them away? He's like, oh no, I put the dry hop in there. And lo and behold, that beer was immensely hoppy. Kind of like you were describing, this pungency that you don't really find in a lot of packaged commercial beers. And so we messed around with that. We've done some experimentation fermentation on it. And they're really, in my opinion, the character that I get from dry hopping at yeast pitch, to me, it's kind of, you're kind of straddling two different worlds. One, you don't have to worry about oxidation as much because you're not opening your fermenter to add your dry hops later on down the line. But if biotransformation is occurring, which I know that the jury is out on that, but if it is, then you're already set up for it. You don't have to worry about coming and adding your dry hops at high Kreuzen like they recommend doing to encourage biotransformation. So I've done that a ton lately. I don't make a lot of dry hopped beers. That's not really a style of IPA. I just go buy good IPA from my friends. But when I do, what I've been doing for the last probably 5 years is just adding those dry hops right at yeast pitch and not worrying about it, and then doing all the closed transfer from there, from my fermentation vessel into the keg. Is that something you've ever tried?
When I was making hazy beers 10 years ago or so, that was my standard protocol. And I can't remember if I would do a second dry hop after, but the ease of adding dry hops at yeast pitch is unparalleled. It's so easy. It's so nice. You just got to be prepared to get the beer out, right? So make sure that whatever your system is can accommodate all those hops in solution. I guess you could use a hop sock. I never did that though when pitching to fermentation.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I forget if it was Palmer or one of the other known names out there who also has a podcast. But I remember somebody saying, don't pack all of your dry hops into a single hop sock or a single even stainless sleeve. I think those stainless sleeves, you're probably best to go 2 to 3 ounces tops, so that if you're going to use it, which I do, if you're going to use it though, you don't want those dry hops or the dry hops that you're putting in to, once they absorb that beer, to fill up the tube or the sock and we've all been there where you pour out, you throw away your dry hops and you see there's some pellets still in the middle. They're dry. They never got access to the beer. So if you're going to do that, if you're going to do these huge dry hops and you want to filter them out, get yourself a few of those canisters or a few bags and only put 2 to 3 ounces in them so that they're more free floating. I think we do have some, there's some evidence out there, including some brewlosophy experiments, that do seem to suggest that filtering using a bag at least can have a notable impact on the hop character of the beer. So yeah, I'm with you. I think there's value in both ways. It's just depends on how I'm feeling the day that I'm dry hopping, I suppose. But yeah, don't go the route of wasting a bunch of hops that end up expanding in the sleeve, and you're not getting the best out of them. So
right, and maybe the final thought here is, if you're doing crazy amounts like me, like 10 ounces in 5 gallons, you can't physically fit that many hop tubes into a keg, right?
I would love to see a picture of that though, Jordan. It'd look like a nuclear reactor or something. But
I know, I'm thinking about this here, and I have a 10-gallon keg that I've used for fermentation, and I think that I would have to use that. And it would, all of these hop canisters would fill the thing up. So that's why I really like the loose method. You just have to be prepared for getting the beer out of the whatever into your serving keg. And this one I recently did, it was about 8 gallons with 10 ounces of hops, I think, and there was so much trub caught at the bottom, and it ultimately only yielded 5-gallon keg of beer.
Jesus, good Lord. Yeah, it's a lot of absorption.
All right, let's move on to the next one. So Jeremiah Pickard asks, have you or anyone you know named their home brewery? I often wonder if I'm alone in this, as I've named mine Twitchcraft Brewing.
Jeremiah, you are so far from being alone on this. All you have to do is hit the forums and you'll see people, they actually sometimes they'll put in their signature, that, or their, whatever it is, their forum, user information. They'll put the name of their quote brewery. I absolutely named it. I just talked about my buddy Chris, who I brewed Smiling Sky Pale Ale with. He and I, the story behind the name that we came up with for our, home brewery, we used to carpool to and from work together, and we're a bunch of philosophy nerds. And we're both psychologists, so we kind of have a similar interest in that. And we were talking about what is it? This is the kind of dorky conversations I get into. What is it that really does seem to spark change in human beings? Is it the techniques that we use in therapy? Is it medicine that people take, or is it what we kind of boiled it down to for both of us at least? Is there's these moments in life that are indescribable. A lot of people may not even remember them directly, but they just serve as these bright spots. spots. And like I have a series of them, and I couldn't tell you what was happening around the time these bright spots occurred. And they don't have to be positive. They don't all have to be negative, but they can be anywhere on that spectrum. And it's those things that kind of define who we are as human beings. So anyways, without going too much into depth on that whole silliness, we called our brewery Bright Spot Brewing. And that was, I believe if you Google it, you'll probably still find an old blog that Chris started with that name, and it has some recipes that are now on brulosophy.com as well. And so yeah, and then obviously we call what we do here Brulosophy. We had to have a name for that, but prior to Brulosophy being a business, that was my name. Brulosifer was my name in all the forums and everything. So one could argue that I also named my home brewery Brulosophy or Brulosifer as well.
So what seems to be a common theme in home brewery names is it really references a passion or an interest or some sort of story. And so when I first started home brewing, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this on the podcast, but I had I brewed beer for a wedding. And one of the attendees at the wedding was a local bar owner, a really great dive bar up in St. John's neighborhood of Portland. And he approached me and he's like, I didn't know you could make beer this good at home. I would like you to brew beer for my bar. I want to have a tap handle that is only available at my bar and it's your beer. I'm like, oh man, dude, I'm a home brewer, like brewing beer professionally, like I've got a job, like that's not how this works. And he dogged on me for years for it. And ultimately I approached a small little gypsy brewer operation and contracted with them that I would brew each recipe, I would brew the first one, and they would contract brew it for me subsequently. That business ended up going under, and and then I was like, I didn't really want to find a new place, so I brewed one batch, and then that was it. And so that kind of fell apart, and I just didn't have the energy to get it going again. So I had to have a brewery name. And so my name that I chose with some help with some friends was Standard Deviation Brewing.
Oh, yeah.
A bit of an homage to statistician by day, brewer by night.
Yeah.
And it just works, right? And since I did that, in fact, a local artist friend, they made a tap handle that's like custom carved out of wood. It's so cool. And I'm here in my home brewery now, given that this didn't really launch successfully in the commercial world. Since I did this, a brewery opened in San Francisco called Standard Deviant.
Yep. That's exactly what I was thinking. And my hunch is they probably didn't know Standard Deviation Brewing even existed when they named it. But yeah, interesting story. So that was effectively, though, you naming your commercial brewery operation Standard Deviation, though, right?
Right. And so when people ask me, does your home brewery have a name? I was, well, I got this little story, and effectively, I guess you could call it that. But, I don't even name my beers other than the requisite name for the website or a competition. So I just don't really get tied up in that stuff. Like I've got a buddy here that's local, and he's really into the whole naming thing. And he's a musician for a hobby, previously by trade. And he named I love this name of his home brewery. It's called Noteworthy. And everything is music themed, and his pun beer names are just off the chain. And so I do like people that have that personal touch to their brewery or beer names.
I've had this conversation a few times actually about what drives some people to want to name everything and other people not to. And I the only thing I could come up with is that it's personality driven. I'm like you for the most part, but my buddy Chris was really into the naming thing and having names, and it is kind of fun to come up with stuff. And now I guess I get that out of my system with Brulosophy because we name every beer that we publish on the site for the most part. I will say this though, that I definitely am not the type of dude who like names my cars or I have a sourdough starter. And if you go on sourdough starter forums, which by the way is perhaps more contentious than homebrewing forums. But if you go there, everybody's got a name for their starter and they're pretty funny. They all have to do with like dough or whatever. And, but I don't do that. I'm not going to name my sourdough starter. I don't see the point in that, but I appreciate the people who find joy, in coming up with clever names for things like that. So, I remembered though, as you were talking, when I first started homebrewing, I think, again, I had a roommate, this is back in 2003, my word. And, he wanted to come up with a name for our like apartment brewery. And so we called it Silver Star. And I don't know where that came from. I think he came up with it. And then prior to the whole Bright Spot thing, I mean, how many home brewery names play off of the whole head thing, right? Let's be honest. The kind of like, oh, innuendo, Big Head Brewery or whatever. We had Happy Head. Yeah, it's so lame, dude. But we had Happy Head until the reason we changed it was people started pointing out there was like, oh, and we just had missed the sexual innuendo there and went with Bright Spot, which we felt was far more meaningful. But yeah, for the most part, I'm not naming much these days, Jeremiah. So, all right, next question comes from Adrian Boley. He says, how often and how do you clean your beer lines? I rinse mine after every keg by purging the sanitizer out of a clean keg with forced CO2. It's not cleaning the lines, but it does get all the old beer out of the line. I know that you purge your kegs with CO2 from fermentation, which is what got me thinking about this. So, Adrian, that last comment there, purging the kegs, that's the whole natural, purging with naturally produced CO2 from fermentation. So
I admit I could do a better job on this. I will say, though, I think my beers taste really pure and clean, so I'm doing a good enough job, but I'm not great about using BLC beer line cleaner. As I gather, it's pretty dangerous, and so, you got to wear gloves, and you're supposed to wear goggles, and so it's definitely easier to just run some sanitizer or PBW through. I used to be really good that every time a keg would kick, I would run PBW through it, and then hot water, and then sanitizer. But lately, what I will, if a keg kicks, I will immediately run beer or sanitizer through it, just so foam isn't sitting in the line, because I'd be afraid that would clump up and create, gunk in the line. So I won't let foam live in the line, but I'm not super great about constantly BLCing them. But I did change my lines recently, actually.
What did you change to, if you don't mind me asking? Are you just going with the standard vinyl, or did you use something more high tech?
So I got a new kegerator, and so it gave me an opportunity to swap the lines out and or build lines, as it were. And I had purchased a few years ago some line that was being touted on the Lodo forums as like the most Lodo line there is, and it coincidentally was so small I could never actually get it to go on a barb. It was just too rigid. But now that these Duo-Tight fittings have come out, it fits perfectly in Duo-Tight. So I'm running Duo-Tight with this Lodo really rigid line on my new kegerator, and my old kegerator, which is kind of like an excess one if I just have too many beers lined up. That's just using like the standard tap lines that came with like the tower. Yeah.
Okay. I'm wondering if this Lodo line you're talking about is the EVA barrier stuff from More Beer. Do you recall?
It was before More Beer was even on the map in terms of like national recognition. I got it from some esoteric brewing supply website in like 2014 or something.
Okay, interesting. Because I upgraded all of my, when I built my new kegerator, I went all EVA barrier with the Duo-Tight fittings as well. And the reason I thought maybe that's what you might have is because they work perfectly with the Duo-Tight fittings. But EVA barrier, the whole thing with it is that it doesn't have a lot of the same properties as, say, regular vinyl tubing or silicone tubing. I guess stuff doesn't stick to it very well, but it's also essentially oxygen impermeable. Now to answer Adrian's question, I have a keg of sanitizer that I just leave next to my kegerator all the time. And so in between every single keg, if I don't have a beer going right on after it, or a beer or anything else, cider or even just sparkling water, then I will run that water through. And then I do my best to push the sanitizer water, to push it through and then to try to empty that line out. I don't want the sanitizer, which is phosphoric acid, Starsan is at least. I don't want that sitting in those lines. I don't know if it could do any damage, but I just don't want to risk it. So I try to empty them as much as I can after running the line through. I've had these EVA barrier, this tubing now, for 4 or 5 years, and it's really clean. And I've run a bunch of weird stuff through these things. I mean, even soda, and you don't get any flavor carryover. I made some root beer for my kids a couple of years ago. The lines are still perfectly clean. There was no root beer flavor in the beer that I served after that. So that's my process. I did go through a period, kind of like you, Jordan, where I would do, as soon as a keg kicked, I would do hot water, like flush it with hot water. I'd run PBW, or I actually did have BLC. I never wore goggles though. And I would run that through. I'd let the BLC sit in the line for about 20 minutes. Then I'd clear it all out with Starsan. And that just got to be a pain in the ass, I'll be honest. And I've never had an issue. I personally have never had an issue with my beer lines being the culprit for bad flavor or anything. So, you kind of start to prioritize. I'm paying far more attention to my water chemistry and my sanitation on the fermentation, the cold side, than I am my beer lines, which, I think anybody who is at least marginally good at keeping things clean probably doesn't have much of an issue with their beer lines, but I don't know. I mean, maybe there are some people out there who've had worse experiences.
Yeah, and there's probably a couple notable exceptions, like a coffee beer, or if you ran cold brew through the line, But generally speaking, hopefully you're not getting too much flavor carryover. So let's shift over to a question from Dennis from the Netherlands. He says, I've been a podcast listener and patron for a couple years now. I really enjoy everything you put out, especially the podcasts and the YouTube videos. When you design an experiment, how do you select which beer is put into 2 cups and which beer is put into 1 cup in the triangle test? I've always wondered this too. Is it simply based on which beer you would like to have more leftovers of? I know that it shouldn't matter by nature of the triangle test, but do you think it would be more representative if you did triangle tests with either being in the cups once or twice?
This is a question that we have received since we started our triangle test approach, almost 10 years ago. So good question, Dennis. All of that falls on to me. And I'm kind of a nut about ensuring that I'm the only one who deals with the surveys. In the very beginning, we kind of toyed around with having everybody just make their own, obviously using a template, but making their survey, picking the beer that's going to be different, all that. And it was just a mess. It was very difficult to keep track of what was going on. So for the purposes of keeping things organized and clean and as, safe to external influences as possible, all of that is on me. So when a contributor of Jordan has an experiment, in fact, I just got an email from Will saying he needs a survey. If he has an experiment that he's working on and he's ready to collect data, he'll shoot me an email or a text and let me know, here's the variable, here's what we're doing. And usually, I would say maybe 5% of the time you guys will be like, can you please make this one the odd beer out because I want more of it than the other ones. And usually we'll yield to that. It doesn't really matter that much. But most of the time it's just me randomly picking one. And I don't think most of the time people don't really notice. They don't really care. So that's how that works. Now, are there better ways to collect data? Without a doubt. You have to remember, we are doing the best we can with the resources that we have. We could do, I believe it's called a quadrangle test instead of a triangle test. But in doing that, it would require far more resources, a lot more work. And the triangle test, based on, I've consulted with, I think it's 4 actual sensory scientists now who have commended our approach. And they're always the ones saying, don't mind the haters. Chances are they're not even statisticians. They're armchair experts, and so don't worry about it. What you guys are doing is close to the industry standard. Now, one thing we don't do is mix up which beer is the odd beer out within a single test. And that would be ideal. Would it change the results? I doubt it, because we're only serving it one time to each person as opposed to having them retaking the test. Part of the reason that we do our series of 5 blind triangle tests ourselves as the non-blinded brewer of the beers is because we end up doing a more randomized version of it. It may be that, beer A is the odd beer out in the first one, then beer B is the odd beer out in the next 3, and then maybe beer A again, because it is more randomized. But for the purposes of collecting the data that we do from blind participants, it is one beer that I randomly select, and then that's what the contributors go with. So hopefully that answers that question.
And please do not make it random on me. I'm always like, okay, this one's red, this one's blue, this one's green, this one's red. And I'm like, I'm so afraid I'm going to fill the wrong bottle. I'm like looking at the notes just like constantly when filling samples for tasters. And so if this was randomized, that would introduce a lot of opportunity for error on the brewer administrator side.
That is such a good point too. I often talk about how difficult it is already for us to go out and collect the data we do. And it's a pain in the ass. I don't think anybody will disagree. We feel like it's worth it, that there's value in doing it. But can you imagine, like you said, just how much room for messing up there would be if we added some other factor in there, like randomizing the odd beer out. It would be such a pain. And I would have a difficult time trusting those results because of the fact that who knows how much mess up there actually was there. So I'm happy with the way we're doing it, and the fact that we've gotten validation from sensory scientists, it just makes it all the more okay for us to keep going that way. And I understand there are going to be scientists out there listening to us right now saying, well, no, it would be easier if you just tried. I promise you, we've tried. We've gone over so many different options. This is what we've settled on. It's been working. The one thing, and I've mentioned this before, that I have considered doing, and maybe we should start like a new series where we take beers that have already had the blind data collected and then we reserve them to people, but we let them know all the nitty gritty details. We basically fill them in on what the brewer of the beers knows, let them know the variable, what they're to expect. And I'd be interested to see if, knowing all of that, they're able to focus more on differences between the beers. The thing is, we've done that a few times in the past, and the data was exactly the same. I mean, really, honestly, almost no different from the blinded data. So I don't know how valuable that would be. I do think it'd be interesting, though.
I think that'd be really fun. Just hopefully there's some beer left by then.
Oh, you don't need to drink the beer you brew, Jordan. Come on now. All right, final question for this segment comes from Hop Dude Ryan, one of our favorite people from Yakima Valley Hops. He says, Lallemand is discontinuing their Kolsch dry yeast. Our customers are upset and struggling to find a replacement. I hear good and bad things about K97 and MJ54. That MJ54 is Mangrove Jacks. I'm not even sure how available that is here in the U.S. at this point, but Ryan says, Lallemand is suggesting that you use Nova Lager. What do you know about the best dry yeast for Kolsch? We want to continue to offer our customers the best.
So I am not a dry Kolsch yeast expert. So given that I've not used MJ54, don't know if I've ever used K97, think I used Lallemand Kolsch yeast once 10 years ago or something like that, nor have I used Nova Lager. My recommendation would be as follows. If you want to go dry, I would use 3470 at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Alternatively, I think the dried Lutra is also a really great clean yeast strain that's would have a similar kind of effect. And then finally, there's nothing wrong with USO5. And White Labs now has a dry 001. And, maybe that's not technically the most authentic approach, but from my experience, I can, those would be the ones I would recommend in terms of they're going to make a great beer. Based on the experience I have.
So I'm a certified BJCP judge. I have drank a lot of beer. I've evaluated and judged a lot of beer. And so I'm going to get a lot of crap for saying this, but the line between Kolsch and other pale lagers is so slim to me that there's so much carryover that, in my opinion, this was actually a suggestion by somebody when we first started doing the warm fermented lager thing, many years ago, is why don't you just call that a Kolsch and people won't get so pissed at you because it's, arguably you're getting more fruity esters because of the warmer fermentation character. And that's what Kolsch is known for. You could do that. So my suggestion would be use something like the Weihenstephan lager strain, which is Safel 3470 or, Imperial Yeasts Global. I think it's WLP 830 from White Labs. Every yeast lab has this yeast. It is the most popular lager strain, and it is incredibly robust. Fermented warm, you're not ruining your beer. Some would contend, Jordan, I think you're among these people, that you do get a different characteristic when using it warm than you would fermenting it cool. But that may be just what those Kolsch people are looking for. That being said, there are other options as well. K97, like Hop Dude Ryan brought up, I've used it a few times because I got some packs of it for free at a conference, and then I've had beers made with it. To me, the thing about K97, and maybe it's changed since the last time I used it, which was probably 5 years ago, it was very unpredictable. Like most yeast, you're like, if I do the same thing every time, I can expect the same thing from it. K97 one time created this kind of weird banana ester, like an isoamyl acetate thing, and then other times it tasted just like a Kolsch should, that just a slight fruitiness with no banana at all. And so I don't know what would cause that. I wasn't the biggest fan of it. But if you're looking for a dry strain, that might be it. Maybe just fermented a little bit cooler. I've never used the MJ54 either. I have had a lot of beers made with Nova Lager. People, trying to convince me to hop on the Kveik strain bandwagon, and they're fine. They taste Kveiki to me, if that is a thing. But you could get away with that. And like you, I mean, if you're really out going to make a Kolsch, do everything else right, ferment it with any clean fermenting yeast, you're probably going to be okay. And honestly, you submit a Kolsch that's fermented with USO5 or the Chico strain to a competition. And my guess is that no judge is going to write, oh, this is obviously fermented with US-05. They're not going to notice it. So I don't know. Another trick that somebody told me many years ago that they do for their Kolsch, which they ferment with Chico, they were using WLP 001 back then, is that they just add a little bit of, I think they said it was Comet hops at the tail end of their boil. And that adds just a touch of fruitiness that kind of like tricks people into thinking that it's the Kolsch yeast fruitiness, but it's really just this Comet hop. So there's a lot of tricks you can try. But I would just recommend kind of the same things it sounds like Lallement is recommending. Use Nova Lager or just buy some lager dry yeast and ferment it warm and see it. Your mileage may vary, as they say, but see what you think. Chances are it's going to taste very Kolsch-like. Alrighty, we've got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Brü A after these messages. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Xchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Xchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you.
Worried about letting someone else pick out the perfect avocado for your perfect impress them on the third date guacamole? Well, good thing Instacart shoppers are as picky as you are. They find ripe avocados like it's their guac on the line. They are milk expiration date detectives. They bag eggs like the 12 precious pieces of cargo they are. So let Instacart shoppers overthink your groceries so that you can overthink what you'll wear on that third date. Download the Instacart app to get free delivery on your first 3 orders while supplies last. Minimum $10 per order. Additional terms apply.
Say goodbye to your credit card rewards. Greedy corporate mega stores, led by Walmart and Target, are pushing for a law in Congress to take away your hard-earned cash back and travel points to line their pockets. The Durbin-Marshall credit card bill would enact harmful credit card routing mandates that would end credit card rewards as we know it. If you love your credit card rewards, tell your lawmakers, hands off my rewards. Tell them to oppose the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill.
All right, time to answer more questions. Go ahead and kick off this round, Jordan.
Okay, Drew asks, how do you get the correct amount of carbonation in kegged beers? I know when you pour from a tap, it depends on CO2 pressure and length of hose, but how do you calculate the amount of pressure you need to get an approximate good level of CO2 in the beer? If there's a podcast about it I can listen to, or if you can let me know, that would be great. This is a great question, Drew, and it's funny. I go to brewlosophy.com. There's an article called Sparkle and Fizz, and I look at it all the time. Marshall, it's got to be one of our most viewed pages, right?
It is. It's in the top 10 of our most viewed pages, without a doubt. It's. You can tell it's one that people reference all the time. And just to answer your question, Drew, we also did an episode, number 224 of the Brewlosophy podcast, purely focused on various carbonation methods and the routes that we take to ensure that we get adequate carbonation in our beer. I would highly suggest checking out the Sparkle and Fizz article on brewlosophy.com and then listening to episode 224 to get more of a well-rounded, response to your question. Also in part because I don't do any calculations. There are charts out there. There's all these things. I just kind of have a feel for carbonating my beers kind of on the fly. And so for everything that I carbonate, if it goes into my keezer, I burst carbonate it, which just means I'm taking my CO2 all the way up to 55 PSI. I hit the keg with it. I let it sit overnight. So about 12 to 15 hours. I reduce it down to, 18 to 20 PSI. take a sample. If it's well carbonated and that's where I want it, then I'll leave it alone, or I'll drop the PSI down to my serving pressure, which in my kegerator is 14 PSI. I have very long beer line, and then I go from there, and I can have perfectly carbonated beer in 24 hours. Usually, and I like my beers a little bit more sparkly than the BJCP might recommend per style. Usually, what I'll do though is after that 12 to 15 hours at 55 PSI, I'll knock it down to 20 PSI, let it sit another 2 to 3 days until it gets right to where I want it, and then purge the keg and drop it down to my serving pressure. And that works for me. I'm not calculating it based on the temperature of my kegerator or, the length of my beer line or the amount of, I just kind of go by feel. And you when you've done it over 500 times, you just kind of know how to do it. I would imagine, Jordan, that you're not sitting there calculating your volumes of CO2 either, or maybe you are.
I have the exact same method, Marshall, except I do about 30 PSI for like 48 hours. And I will note that I now have 2 kegerators, one of which has a flow control taps, and the other one has those standard taps without any sort of flow control. And I can get away with more carbonation on the flow control taps just because I can have a high pressure and then dial it down so it's not just blasting out the beer. So there is a bit of a consideration there related to your beer lines or your tap faucets, but I'm not doing any calculations. It's a bit of a vibe, as it were.
You just feel it, I just kind of know. And it's different for everything that I brew. If I'm making a Saison, for example, that I want to be very, very sparkly, it's actually cider, Saison, and sparkling water is the reason that I went with beer line as long as I did. My beer line is 14 feet long, and it's also the 4 millimeter EVA barrier. So it's not the 5 millimeter. It's smaller, so more constricted, which allows me to really carbonate whatever is in the keg much higher than you might, with 10 foot of 1/4 inch beer line. Or what is it? 3/16 inch, I think is the standard. And I was just getting glasses full of foam whenever I'd make a Saison. So I've got my kegerator balanced just right to where I'm able to pour these highly carbonated beers without much issue at all. And so these are things you just have to keep in mind when it comes to carbonation. The beauty of carbonation is that, as fearful as it seems a lot of people are, if you overcarb a beer, a cider, water, whatever it might be, it's incredibly easy to fix. All you do is disconnect your CO2, purge your keg, and then come back 12 hours later, purge it again and test it. And if it's still overcarb, you purge it again. It might take you 3 or 4 days, but you'll absolutely fix it. It's not that big of a deal. And I don't think you're blowing off like hop aromatics or anything like that. It's a worst case scenario, of course, but I've very rarely, I think in the 20 years that 15 years I've been kegging, I might have overcarbed 2 or 3 beers. It's not that big of an issue. So.
Right. And the key here is that we're not cranking and shanking. That's when you really come into risk. And so there's methods like that out there. We don't recommend it. It's too risky. And as long as you have a day to get this thing carbonated, the burst carboning method works really great. And just make sure you dial your pressure back down when you go to serve.
Well, yeah, and purge your keg before you do that. I think we actually addressed it on the last Brü A. Somebody's like, every time, I dial it back down to my serving pressure, the gauge goes all the way back up to where it was before, and it's just blowing out of you got to purge the keg first. When you're letting it sit on 30 to 50 PSI, that's how much pressure is in that keg. So purge it out, disconnect or turn off your the gas from your regulator, crank that down, and then make sure to put it back on, and then you can serve it at that pressure. So, alrighty, next question comes from, Ed Agentowicz, I think is how you say it. Agentowicz. He says, I'm looking to brew my first sour beer. Jordan, this one is a question for you, and I love where you're going to take this already. I understand the steps for brewing it, but I want to add Sour Patch Kids or Swedish Fish candy to it. How, when, and where would I add them?
Oh gosh. My first initial gut response is please don't add candy to your sour beer. My recommendation would be, first, I think that it wouldn't work that well. And please, if you do it, let us know how it works out. Send me a bottle. But I don't see how these candies would readily dissolve or add much flavor or aroma. If anything, it could add things we don't want to add, oils, etc. So I think you would struggle. So my best practice recommendation would be look at the flavors that those add and get Oregon Fruit brand puree. It's a pure fruit puree. It's going to have a bit more of a quote synthetic flavor than you would get from adding whole fruit, but it's really pure. It's really great. It's just not quite as complex as adding like whole fresh cherries from the farmer's market or something like that. Figure out the types of fruit flavors that you're interested in from Sour Patch Kids or Swedish Fish. Maybe the Swedish Fish one is like you use like cherry and raspberry combined maybe or something. I don't know. And just use those Oregon fruit purees. But for the sake of argument, I want to think through how I would actually add the candy. So I would hope that this is a kettle sour. This would be such a shame to add candy to like a 3-year-old goose blend or something. But so assuming it's a kettle sour, I would add it. I think that maybe actually flame out would be the way to go, because then it would melt it down. Good luck cleaning your, plate chiller and stuff after this, but maybe that would impart something. And if it doesn't add enough, then try dry hopping with the candy. Those would be the two ways that I would think about going about it, but I do not have high expectations for this working well or being easy to clean up.
Okay. So, as somebody who doesn't take sour beer nearly as seriously as you do, Jordan, I'm going to go with I thought about this long and hard, at least a good, 90 seconds. So here's how I think I would do it. First thing to consider is that if I'm not mistaken, at least Sour Patch Kids, the sour that you get from that candy, I believe comes from malic acid. It is a very, very tart compound. It's also what's on, Warhead candies. I don't know if you recall, but there was a whole series of Warhead beers, sour beers out there for a minute. They were god awful. And so to me, what they tasted like is, and I've got experience with oxidized New England IPA, that weird, sweet oxidation thing. To me, it always reminds me of gummy candies, just without the flavor, or like the inside of a lemon head is how I've described it to people. Just that weird, it's sugar, but it doesn't taste, at least to me, it doesn't taste very good. Those Warhead beers tasted like that. And I don't know if they actually used real warheads or how they soured those beers. There's probably a reason they're not around anymore, or at least that they never gained any popularity. But if you are dead set on making a sour beer with these types of candies, which again, disclaimer, I hate these candies. I do not, if it doesn't have chocolate or peanut butter in it, I'm not eating it. What I would do is put kind of like dry hopping. I didn't even think about flame out to melt them. I don't know if I would want them melting in the kettle, because I would imagine that candy would stick to the element in my electric kettle. So I don't know if I'd go that route for me. What I would do is add them, if you're going to do a kettle sour, for example, and you have the ability to keep that wort warm while it's souring without melting without risking the melting on the element there. What I would do is put the candy in a dry hop, stainless mesh filter thing that you would use for dry hops. And I'd plop that in during the souring process and then just move it over to the fermenter as well and kind of let it stay in contact the whole time. What I found is when people I had a friend who made a cinnamon, it wasn't a sour beer, but it was like this weird cinnamon blonde ale thing where they used Red Hots, and they dissolved. All he did is add it to fermentation, to the fermenter, and they readily dissolved. And I think the yeast help with that, because they want to access the sugar that's in these candies and ferment them. I mean, that's just how they work. So I have a feeling that a softer candy like Sour Patch Kids or Swedish Fish or whatever else would probably do the same thing. You're probably going to get some dissolution and fermentation of those sugars. Would it taste good? I mean, again, send it to Jordan. He'll tell you. I would probably not enjoy it very much, but that's what I would do. And I'm with you, Jordan. Definitely kettle sour this one. Do not ruin a beautiful, 2-year-old 5-gallon batch of sour blonde ale or something.
Right. All right. But what a fun idea, though. I appreciate
exactly.
the ingenuity there. So, Kyle Anderson asks, I've been following the 66 degree Fahrenheit or 19C lager fermentation method, and I'm loving the simplicity and speed. The question I have for you is when you would dry hop a West Coast Pilsner using this method. I want some active fermentation going on to avoid oxidation, but I also want to do it close enough to when I transfer that I don't have to pull out the dry hop canisters, which would again expose me to more oxidation risk. Any thoughts?
So, I've never made a West Coast Pilsner, so disclaimer there, but I've absolutely made dry hopped pilsners or dry hopped lagers, quite a few in fact. So I feel like I have the experience to be able to adequately answer how I would go about doing this. But he makes comment here that I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. I also want to do it close enough to when I transfer that I don't have to pull out the dry hop canisters. So I don't know if this is accurate, but the way I'm interpreting that is that he is, I guess, would remove the dry hops from the beer at some point, out of fear of maybe like imparting vegetal characteristics. And so what he's saying, again, my interpretation is that he wants to add the dry hops so that within however long, maybe less than a week, he can rack into a serving keg and not have to take those hops out of there or whatever. I don't ever worry about that. But the way that I would do it is about 3 days into fermentation, when there's still a little bit of activity, very gently, open up my fermentation vessel, toss the dry hops in, purge the top, just again, as a prophylactic against hopefully stopping any oxygen exposure from taking place or oxidation from taking place. And then I'd leave it for 24 to 48 hours tops. And probably what my typical approach with any dry hopped beer is I add the dry hops, let it go for 24 hours, cold crash with the dry hops in there so that you get whatever it is, some people claim you get out of a cold dry hop. And then I keg from there. So 48 hours max is what I'm dry hopping these days. That's not to say that I think longer will ruin a beer. There's some evidence out there that you get the best out of those hops, or at least what I tend to prefer with a shorter duration of a dry hop, but really no different than what I would do with a pale ale or an IPA.
Right. And so my interpretation of the spirit of this question is, when do I dry hop a lager? Because there's some lagering theoretically associated with it. There's some temperature changes that are a little different. And so the short answer, and I've made a ton of West Coast Pilsners, love the style, is and I think the industry pro brewer best practice is that you dry hop before lagering in these hoppy lagers. And also my recommendation would be to do it at room temp. Don't do it at lagering temps. So in a world where you're fermenting that warm, the last day or so of fermentation, if you want to do it on the yeast cake, like we talked about in the last segment, just add those dry hops directly to your fermenter. They can be in the canister as long as you're not, exceeding more than a couple ounces per canister. I think that West Coast Pilsner actually benefits from a super high dry hopping rate of closer to 2 ounces per gallon of beer. And put your dry hops in there, however you may do it. And then I like to crash cool to help drop some of that, any risk of particulate, floating around to get into the out tube, and then transfer to your lagering keg and then lager it for 2 weeks or so, and you should be good to go.
So yeah, that's an interesting point that he's making this West Coast Pilsner, which you'd expect a lager. I guess I didn't consider the lagering period because of the fact that he's following the 66 degree Fahrenheit lager fermentation method, as Kyle says. So the thing is, even if I'm making an IPA, everything that you just laid out is exactly how I do it as well, right? I add the dry hops. The next day I cold crash. The next day after that I keg it. I throw it in the fridge and I let it cold condition for a week or two while I'm, carbonating. And so it's kind of the same. For me, the process is really no different. Now I'm a blasphemous lager brewer, as you know, but it's really no different than what I would do with a pale ale or an IPA. Now, if you're planning, Kyle, to do an extended lagering period, you should probably start fermenting cool as well. Because I mean, would you agree with that, Jordan? That if you're looking for the closest, lager character that you can get from something like a West Coast Pilsner, then you should probably just ferment it cool. It might add another week onto your fermentation overall. But then you can, now it's time to consider like, okay, when do I want to dry hop this, particularly given that it's going to be lagering for 4 to 6 weeks or something.
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously that's my recommendation would be to, ferment that a little colder, and I'll go a little warmer on my West Coast Pilsners, more like 50 degrees Fahrenheit versus like a traditional Helles might be closer to 46 Fahrenheit. But the downside of fermenting cold is you need to use more yeast, or I would argue that you should. And that might be one reason that some homebrewers prefer to ferment a little warmer, is because they feel more confident pitching just a single pouch. But when it comes down to West Coast Pilsner dry hopping, the recommendation is dry hopping before lagering, not after, and just even a couple weeks of lagering, at least when fermented cold, seems to really brighten it up and get you a great hoppy beer in a lager format.
And as you were answering that, another option that I've never tried, but I know that you have quite a bit of experience with some of these new hop products that Haas is pushing out and we get from Yakima Valley Hops. I suppose another option would be to make your standard West Coast Pilsner base, but then instead of dry hopping it, the way we're talking about here is using one of, I don't know what product it would be, perhaps you could say, but adding that hop product, which is like a flowable liquid, maybe a day or two before serving. Do you think that would be helpful or maybe contribute, that hoppy character that they're looking for?
That's an interesting idea. So my latest one uses T90, Incognito in the dip hop, and Lupomax, T90, and Spectrum in the dry hop. So I'm using all the things, and this beer is tasting so good. And so I think that there is a lot of magic in these flowables. And so the Spectrum flowable is intended as a dry hop application, and they say that it basically is instantly ready. So you could even, like a pro brewer could literally dose this in the bright tank or something like that to add more or add the initial dry hop character. Now, they don't recommend using Spectrum on its own. It has a pretty intense character, and I think that it would not be ideal to just use it on its own, but you could always bump up the dry hop character that had previously had T90 in it if you're not satisfied with a little bit of Spectrum at the end. In the last Brewlosophy Patreon event, we had a member from John I. Haas speak about all sorts of fun stuff, and one of the questions that I asked was around Spectrum use, and he recommends a 0.5 gram per liter. And so no more than that. And so what that means is that depending on your batch size at the homebrew scale, you could be using too much Spectrum that comes in their 20 gram packs. So, and he recommends no more than 50% of the dry hop load. So I do think that there is something there, but I wouldn't recommend using too much or it being the only dry hop charge.
Yeah, that is a fascinating idea. So we're talking for a 5-gallon batch, 19 liters, you're looking at 9.5 grams of Spectrumazole. That's nothing. I mean, that is nothing. So we're talking about, Haas and all of their hop products and it's just amazing what they've done. We were at Haas, before COVID. That was the last year of Hop Harvest before COVID hit. And they have a really great little tasting room where they have beers on tap using their experimentals and all that stuff. And, we had a beer served to us and we're drinking it and everyone's enjoying it. And I forget who, I think it was the brewer actually came out and he goes, "What do you think of that beer? Can you guess what hops are in it?" We're trying to guess it and kind of geeking out. And he goes, yeah, there was actual no hops used to make that. It was all hop products. So it was like Incognito before any of this stuff was released. It was like Incognito, Spectrum, whatever else. And the beer tasted really good. And it's just wild to think that in the future, I have to imagine, whether it's for reasons of conservation or whatever, I don't know, saving money, maybe, who knows, but that there's going to be a push towards relying more on these downstream hop products than just hops themselves. Who knows? I just recall that beer being surprisingly hoppy despite not having any vegetal matter in it, no T90 or anything. So kind of cool stuff. All right, final question for the show comes from patron Daniel Bundy. He says, I was listening to episode 289 about dip hopping. This is something you have experience with here, Jordan. And in the first few minutes, you guys were talking about different aspects of hops. I had a light bulb moment where you had mentioned how oxidized or aged hops naturally can contribute more beta acids when used, due to the aging process boosting levels of those compounds. I recently brewed a double IPA that I've made many versions of over the years and was alarmed by the overwhelming bitterness I perceived after dry hopping. Forgive me for the graphic description, but it's like a grapefruit rind meets day-old orange juice. Ugh. It's not all bad though, thankfully. It still has a pungent citrusy aroma. For context, this was a 5-gallon batch of wort with a 1073 OG. I used around 5 ounces from 2021 crops that I probably opened 2 years ago and have been in my freezer ever since. It was Galaxy, Citra, and Idaho 7, and the beer was fermented with Voskvike. This particular beer has never tasted like this, and I suspect beta acids are the culprit. All that to say, I'm curious as to what you think about the role of beta acids when utilized in dry hopping. Is it possible to get that much undesirable character from beta acids from a basic dry hop?
This is a fascinating question and maybe the wrong podcast. I think this would be a great one for the Brü Lab because there's got to be research on this. So forgive us for not being the scientists that have hard data, but I do think that you're onto something here. I think this is a really reasonable hypothesis. It is well known that the older your hops are, the higher the risk is for a negative outcome when used later in the process. And so for that reason, my recommendation would be use older hops on the front end as bittering and really reserve your dry hop additions for as fresh as you can possibly get your hands on. And I can't help but wonder if excessive beta acid is really behind negative outcomes when it comes to dry hopping with old hops.
Yeah. Old hops is the issue. And I swear, I feel like we just talked about this on the show, but age to me, and this is anecdote, my experience over many years and many batches where there was bitterness that I didn't want there present. To me, it's not so much the age as it is the way those hops were treated over time, right? So if I've brewed with 5-year-old hops, I've dry hopped with 5-year-old hops, and it's great, but those hops were stored in my fridge, out of the light, low oxygen exposure, and cold. I've also brewed with hops that intentionally, right, for experiments that were left out for a year, and it absolutely had that just telltale signs of that beta acid, sharp, very unpleasant bitterness. So to me, it's more the oxidation of the hops than it is just the age alone. Obviously, the two are kind of interlinked there, but it's also all but impossible to know for sure what's causing that. So I can't say, Daniel, if it was the hops that caused this bitterness or whatever. But one thing that I found, and again, I apologize if I'm being redundant on this because I feel like we just talked about it, is that you can over bitter a beer with fresh hops, and that bitterness, it might be pretty strong, and you're kind of wincing a little bit when you're drinking that beer, but it is nowhere near as gross as that awful beta acid bitterness that almost like bites your tongue back, right? And so to me, that's tasting the beers is how I'm able to determine whether or not it's more likely one over the other. Again, I'm not testing it. I don't really know. Here's something that, again, I'm going to get a little blowback on, I'm sure. Most beers that I've had that have been for very, very hoppy beers that have been fermented with Voskvik specifically tend to have this character to them that I don't find all that pleasant. I don't think it's a surprise that Kvike is kind of losing popularity and people are going back to regular brewing yeasts. Not that it's bad stuff. I just don't think it's cracked up. It's all it's cracked up to be, and people are starting to realize that. There are certain things it's going to contribute to beer. As great as it is for people who ferment in warmer environments and don't have the ability to control their fermentation temperature, wonderful, do it. But that might also be something that contributed to this characteristic that you're referring to, Daniel. What I would do is probably brew a similar beer with the same hops, but ferment it at 65, 66 degrees Fahrenheit, around 19 degrees C, with something like Chico, Flagship from Imperial or Cal L from White Labs, whatever it might be, and see where you go from there. I just the whole alpha beta acid thing stemmed from a conversation that I had with people up in Yakima during hop harvest, and that's where I came up with this concept that it is potentially that. It makes sense to me, but again, I don't have evidence to prove that that's what's happening. We just kind of know from the experts out there who I've talked to.
And I'm with you, Marshall. I'm not a big fan of what Voss brings to an IPA specifically. Blonde ale or something like that, sure, go for it. But it's just, it's a little off, and maybe that might be related to this grapefruit rind meets day old orange juice. However, the other thing to note here is that different hop varieties have different storage potential, and Galaxy has a notoriously low storage potential. This was also something that was it Jeff from John I. Haas that was on our Patreon video chat?
Jeff Daly.
Yeah, Jeff Daly was. I was asking about Galaxy. I was like, why does this hop suck all of a sudden? I swear it was great 10 years ago, and it's just like I'm done brewing with Aussie hops. I keep getting burned. They have this like dirt flavor to me. And he's like, this is a known issue, and it's related to the storage quality of these hops. And by the time it gets shipped over here on a boat and gets into our freezers, they might have turned already. And so he said that the Australian hop industry is working really hard to get Americans better hops here stateside, and he says that going forward he expects Galaxy to be a lot better like it used to be. And so I would not be surprised is if you didn't have these old Galaxy in that beer, it would be a lot better.
That is really fascinating to think about, because I'll never forget the first time I brewed with Galaxy, and it was in the height of homebrewing when it was so difficult to get your hands on certain hop varieties. And we were lucky enough to be partnered with Yakima Valley Hop. So they sent me a pound of fresh Galaxy, like right when they got it delivered from Australia. And I'm telling you, it blew me away. I've had commercial beers made with Galaxy, but that one that I made by myself was like, wow, this is crazy good stuff. And I've had the same experience you have. In the past 4 or 5 years, beers that I've had that were made with Galaxy have this kind of earthy thing that I don't remember being present in the past. I worry a little bit with the downturn in brewing and beer in general right now, if that's actually going to negatively impact our ability to get good quality hops, because they are overstocked. I mean, they were growing all of these, planning on beer and brewing staying as popular as it was 5 years ago. And so they've got this whole stockpile of hops. The same with Yakima and Willamette Valley and all of that is, they're who knows? I'm just kind of presuming here, but it is an interesting thought that maybe it was the Galaxy that contributed to this characteristic that you're talking about in your double IPA, Daniel. I think one thing's clear is that, Jordan and I are both on the I don't really know bandwagon, but the best you can do is kind of experiment with different things, different approaches. My suggestion would be, do one thing at a time, change one thing at a time. And when you make that beer that is as close to perfect as you can get it, then you realize that's what I've got to do. And then you can look back and say, well, look what I didn't do this time that I did last time. Maybe that's the culprit. So I don't really know, but that's the best we've got. And that is all the time we've got for our 330th episode. Thanks again to everybody who has submitted questions for this. I always enjoy answering them. Jordan, what did you think of your first time doing a Brü A?
This is super fun. I love these episodes and looking forward to doing more in the future.
Absolutely. If you have questions you'd like us to answer in a future Brü A episode, whether they have to do with brewing or not, please send them to feedback@brulosophy.com and make sure to indicate in the subject line that it is for Brü A so that I don't delete it or answer the email right away. Don't forget to check out the Brew Lab podcast, where host Cabe Jobe takes you into the lab with brewing professionals to discuss the fascinating work they've done on our favorite beverage. And make sure to head to brulosophy.com to read up on all of the fun beer and brewing stuff we're up to. The Brulosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brulosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brulosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brulosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more. Life is good, the likelihood of me.
Say goodbye to your credit card rewards. Greedy corporate mega stores, led by Walmart and Target, are pushing for a law in Congress to take away your hard-earned cash back and travel points to line their pockets. The Durbin-Marshall credit card bill would enact harmful credit card routing mandates that would end credit card rewards as we know it. If you love your credit card rewards, tell your lawmakers, hands off my rewards. Tell them to oppose the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill.